When I was studying at George Fox University, I got involved in pretty much every single facet of music that I could. I was in multiple choirs, I played on the chapel band, and even started a barbershop quartet. At one point, I was involved in 7 different musical groups or activities. Obviously, I love music, and research shows that music has numerous positive effects on people's brains and bodies. But unfortunately, a lot of people don't have access to music as children and never get the opportunity to explore it like I'm so grateful that I was able to. And that is where Susan Sokol Blosser and the Yamhill Enrichment Society, or YES, come in. Along with partnering with Dolly Parton's foundation to provide access to books for all children, which we'll get to in the episode, Yamhill Enrichment Society also has the JOY program, which stands for Junior Orchestra of Yamhill County. As stated in their mission, the JOY program transforms lives of underserved youth in Yamhill County through high-caliber, intensive orchestral music instruction through emphasizing teamwork and collaboration, which promotes student insight and creativity and helps them engage in the community. So in this episode, we're going to be getting to know the founder of YES, Susan Sokol Blosser, who is also a well-known community leader and one of the original pioneers in the Oregon wine industry. So we'll learn about her journey in the wine business and how she ultimately decided to start YES. Hi, I'm Daniel Roberts. I'm a local realtor here in Newburgh, a member of several organizations in Newburgh where I get to interact with some really amazing people here in town and share their stories on this podcast. I also have the Living in Newburgh YouTube channel, which is all about what it's like living in Newburgh. There's a little bit of real estate stuff in there too. So if you like these podcasts, you'll probably really enjoy that channel as well. So you can click on the link, which is in the description here. But I love this town. I love helping people move here. I love helping people learn about our amazing community. And I do this podcast because I also really love sharing about all the organizations and people who make this town the great place that it is. And that's what this podcast is all about, to share stories of hope and generosity in Newburgh and the surrounding area to help people be inspired, get involved, and ultimately have a hope for our future. So I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Susan as we talk about Yamhill Enrichment Society. Well, Susan, thank you so much for joining me today. I've been talking to Alyssa Johnson, who is involved with your organization for a while, about doing this podcast. And I feel like it's been over a year, and finally we're here and sitting down and recording it. So it's great to finally be here. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here.
So Susan Sokol Blosser, obviously, there's a lot of people who know that name, or if they don't know you specifically, they've heard about the Sokol Blosser, I can't even pronounce it right, Sokol Blosser Winery, which is one of the first wineries in Oregon. So you guys were instrumental in really making this area a really prominent wine region. And we'll get to talking about the Yamhill Enrichment Society and all of that. But first, I think it's important for people to hear your story and how you kind of got to be in the position you are. So I'd love, if you could, for just a few minutes to share a bit about the early wine days, or the vineyard years, which is that the name of your book?
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So if you could share a little bit about that, just for people who may not be familiar with who you are.
Sure. Well, my husband, Bill Blosser, and I planted our first vineyard in 1971. We actually bought the property at the end of 1970, 2 weeks after we had our first child. So I look at it as we each gave birth. And that child is over 50 now. So we've been doing this a long time. And I guess one of the things that I'm really proud of is that the business has actually survived for over 50 years, which is relatively unusual for a business. But people ask all the time, how did you get into this? And I have several different answers. One is we were young and we were nuts, and we, what did we have to lose? It's the kind of decision you make when you're young and are willing to put time and labor in something instead of money. A lot of the folks who come into the wine business now are doing it either as retired or where they've made money in something else and have always wanted to have a winery. Well, which is great. But when we started, and the handful of other young urban professionals like we were, we didn't have a lot of money. And so we bought everything used and traded information. And we became very close. And the whole wine industry fit in our living room. And we would meet. There are now over 900 wineries in Oregon.
You'd have to have a very big living room to fit everybody.
Yes, indeed. Be a ballroom. But I think we were part, there was a back to the land movement then, and we were part of that. There was also a out-of-the-box entrepreneurial thinking when at the time that we started. It's the same time that Microsoft started, that Apple started, that Julia Child was teaching the world to cook in a different way. I mean, there were just all these things that were happening that were different ways of thinking. And my sense is that we were part of that energy. We just manifested it in a different way. And it turns out that this idea of starting a vineyard was happening all over the world. That's when the New Zealand industry started. That's when a new generation in Europe was undertaking to do something different in the wine industry. So we thought we were unique. We were part of a global trend.
Did you have any imagination or dream of it becoming what it is now, or what did you expect when you first started?
When we first started, we started with a vineyard, and we had that for a few years before we were able to start the winery. And we didn't know what to expect. And it was very difficult to think about the future because we were so busy trying to put one foot in front of the other to keep going. So I had no idea that Pinot Noir would become an international demand item and that Oregon would have the recognition for its wine industry that we have now.
Yeah. Well, it's incredible no matter how you look at it, what you guys have been able to accomplish. And looking back, I mean, do you have some of those memories that feel like either key memories or pivotal points between when you started and now?
Well, there were many pivotal points, like surviving. And I think, one of the most recent pivotal points, which is what all the early vineyard people, winery people have had to face, is what happens as you get older. And what are you going to do with the winery? And that's been very interesting to watch because for most, in fact, if they had children, the children were not interested or not competent. Two different things. And so they sold. And that has happened to a number of the founding wineries. At Sokol Blosser, we thought about, when I was president, I thought about selling. And because it was so much work, and my kids said, no, we love the winery. And even though they all went out to do other things, they all circled back. And two of them came into the business. And this is where the pivot point starts. We went through a 3-year transition, and I turned over control to them. And they have been running the winery since then. So my title was president. It's now founder. They thought of a title for me, which was very sweet.
Yeah. That must feel, one, amazing to have your children running it and still be in charge, but also imagine there's a amount of bittersweetness that it's no longer you're the founder, but you're not in control anymore. Has that been hard, or does that feel like a weight off your shoulders?
Well, I would say both. It initially was very hard. In fact, giving up control, I think, is the hardest thing I've ever done. And I actually went through a grief period, which I had no idea that was going to happen. It was my idea to institute a transition so that we would have a pathway for them to take over. And initially, that was fine. It was a 3-year transition. The last year was just excruciating for me. And I kept asking myself, why is this so difficult? This was my idea. And I found out, I went to a business counselor and she said, I have a word for you. She said, it's grief. You're giving up control. And that actually feels really good right now because I don't have to handle the daily crises that come up. My kids are doing it. They're doing a great job. I'm so proud of them. And I get to share in the bounty.
Yeah. Share briefly about your book, too, that you wrote, and how did that come about to actually decide to write that?
Well, I've actually written 5 books.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yes. The first one was called At Home in the Vineyard. And I wrote that over a period of the late 90s and the early 2000s to make sense of my life. I never had dreamed of being in the wine business, and I never dreamed I would be a business person, and yet that's what I was. So, and I was told, I was encouraged to write it by a number of people who said, the wine industry is changing. There are not many people who remember what it was like in the early days, and you're one. So sit down and write. And so I did that for those 2 reasons. And the University of California Press wanted to publish it, which was great. They had a niche of wine books, and they didn't have anything from Oregon. So the Vineyard Years that you referenced was really updated. After my kids took over in 2008, they said, well, the At Home in the Vineyard was out of print, and they wanted to redo it and update it. So I did, and from the perspective of age. So it's a different slant on the story, and it also takes place up through 2016. So it covers the transition and is a much fuller account. It also has recipes in it, which are food memories. It's not a cookbook at all, but food memories from the experience. The other books are Gracious and Ruthless, which is my business philosophy. It's a series of short essays. And then I wrote a book called Letting Go, which is I had to write just for my own sanity after I turned over control, because everybody talks about accumulation, networking, wealth, all the things that lead to success. Nobody talks about letting go. So I wanted to write about that. And then the most recent book is called 7 Lessons at 70, Notes from the Front Line. And that's a series of short essays about aging.
Those sound like, but it's funny because I know I'm not old, but I feel like I'm one of those people who will never admit to being old, no matter how old I am. But there's so many interesting principles about aging, because I live with a philosophy of I want to live now how I will be able to look back and be glad I did, essentially. So learning lessons like that at a young age, I feel like are helpful. doesn't do a whole lot of good if you get to 70, 80, 90, and then read books about, oh, this is how I wish I would have lived. And at the same time, learning to age well and aging with a positive perspective. And I think our culture does such a disservice to aging, and everyone's trying to avoid aging. But how can you learn to embrace it, which it sounds like you have, and at least you've reflected a lot on it.
Yes. Oh, those are all good points. And that's what I tried to address.
So from going to, you were running the vineyard, there's the transition period. At what point, coming back kind of full circle to the Yamhill Enrichment Society, how did you decide that was something you want to do? And for those who may not be familiar with what it is, if you could describe a bit about the society itself.
Yeah, you bet. So after 2008, and I turned control over to the kids, and I was trying to decide what I wanted to do, I was recruited to run for state representative. Mm-hmm. So I did that. I thought, I was a former teacher. I have experience in education. I'm a small business person. I've been a farmer. I'm perfect for Yamhill County. So I agreed to run, and I lost. But I raised a lot of money, and there were a lot of people who believed in me, and I became connected with the community in a way that I hadn't been. And I thought, I can work on issues that interest me locally. I don't have to be at the state level to deal with these. And I said to myself, I want to do something in Yamhill County. So that had to be in the name, and I wanted it to be positive. So I came up with the acronym YES before I actually came up with a name.
Okay, I wondered which order that came in.
So Yamhill Enrichment Society, which, doesn't really mean much, but it has the acronym YES. And because I had raised so much money, this is why I mentioned that, I had money left over, and, you can't keep the money. You can return it to the party, or you can give it to a charity. And I thought, I'll make my own charity. So that's what I did. And I started it. I got a community board together, and we received our nonprofit status, the 501c3, in 2011. So the vision has changed a little bit over the years as we've really honed in on what we want to do, and what we've honed in on are children. And we have two programs. One is, they're literacy and music. The literacy program is part of a nationwide program called Imagination Library that is run out of the Dolly Parton Foundation. And we are the Yamhill County affiliate. So we enroll children from birth to 5, and without charge. And the Dolly Parton Foundation sends each child to their home every month an age-appropriate book. So if a child is enrolled at birth, by the time they age out at 5, they will have accumulated their own little library of 60 books. We've had this program about 10 years, and over that time, we have shipped out over 250,000 books.
Wow. Just within Yamhill County, 250,000 books?
Yes.
Wow.
So, and these are books that we really aim to enroll children who otherwise might not have books in the house. So we go to Head Start, we go to the relief nurseries, we go to pediatricians. We try to leave no stone unturned to get kids in. And for us, it's a very efficient program because it costs us per child $25 a year to have a book a month mailed to them. So we raise money for that because we don't charge.
Yeah. And I know personally that my kids love books. We've been reading to them since they were little, but like you said, many kids don't have that opportunity. And can you share about what is so important between those ages of 0 to 5 that reading is so important in those years?
Well, reading to a child is particularly one who's not going to understand, a baby. It's more about bonding with the parents. And every book that the foundation sends has tips for parents or caregivers how to relate to your child with this book. So it's learning, it's the bonding experience, it's learning words, and then as soon as they're speaking, it's following the words and looking at the pictures. I mean, there's just so much. One of the things we're doing now is trying to do evaluations. So do the kids who go through this program that have received these books, do they do better in school? Do they read better? How do they do on reading tests? I mean, all the studies that the Dolly Parton Foundation has done says yes to all of this, but we want to do our own studies.
Yeah. Do you guys have any partnership with the library in town?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I imagine you would. I'm just curious how that works.
Right.
Because I think they had I'm trying to remember what it was. I think it was they're trying to get kids to read 1,000 books by the age, whatever age it was.
Well, I think that's a school program.
Is it?
So you have to remember that this is a preschool program. You age out at 5, and then you start kindergarten.
Yeah. One of the funny things about, because some people might say, well, 1 book a month, it doesn't seem like very much. But if you have a little kid, they always want to read the same books over and over. So as they begin accumulating those, it's, they got a whole collection, and they don't get tired of books like I would think that a person should.
That comes later.
Yeah.
So one of our board members, for whom English is her second language, has a daughter who was enrolled in this. And she is so enthusiastic about the program because she said at her home, when growing up in Mexico, there were no books in the house. So she feels like she is giving her daughter an opportunity that she didn't have.
Yeah.
And so that really speaks to us that we're making a difference.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And the other part of your organization has to do with music. So how did you settle on that?
So the music program is also allied with, this time, an international program that called El Sistema, the system, which started in 1975 in Venezuela. And it was started by musicians who were community-minded, and they started it as a way to engage the very poorest kids who had no opportunities at all. And their thought was, we will harness the power of music for social change. We will teach these kids to play instruments. And the research shows that when children are taught an instrument, it's like putting the brain on a full body workout, that you learn focus, you learn discipline, you learn all kinds of teamwork. And inside, it develops your brain, executive qualities. I mean, the research is absolutely compelling. And it is most important, most critical, if you start at an early age, before age 7. So this program that we have, we call JOY, which stands for Junior Orchestra of Yamhill County, which is what we aspire to. And we started to work with the public schools in Newburgh. And in order to do that, we had to get the blessing of the superintendent, of the principal, and especially of the music teacher, because we hires a violin teacher to work with the music teacher to teach every kindergartner how to play the violin. It's an incredible program. So during kindergarten and first grade, this practice, teaching the violin, happens during music class. Starting in second grade, the children have to sign up because it becomes an after-school program. And we introduce cello and viola so they can play ensembles. So this program started, our Joy program started in 2017 at Edwards Elementary in Newburgh. We were really pleased to start there because we understood that 86% of the student body was on free or reduced lunch. So these were kids who wouldn't otherwise have this opportunity. And the music teacher then, Janice Dodson, who has since retired, I'm so sorry to say, was enthusiastic, was really terrific, and worked with our teaching artist. That pilot program, those kids just finished their fifth grade this past June. Wow. And are going to help middle school orchestra really shine. So we are starting one more school in Newburgh this fall in a few weeks at Crater. And we did start in McMinnville. We did open 2 schools for Joy last September, and we will open 2 more this September. So our vision is that every elementary school in Yamhill County has this program. And if you were able to see these kids play, whether they're kindergartners or fifth graders, you would be so impressed by the focus, by their discipline, by their enthusiasm, by their pride in what they've achieved. We've had really terrific response from parents who are thrilled to see what their children have accomplished.
Yeah, that's incredible. Have you gone to performances and watched the children perform?
Oh, absolutely.
Have you seen you've kind of been there since the beginning. Have you seen how they've changed and grown over the past several years?
Well, the McMinnville School District folks came to visit the Joy program before they decided they wanted to do it. And first they watched the kindergarten class, and then they watched the first grade class. And they were amazed by the progression from kindergarten to first grade in what they had accomplished and how they played. So every year they get better.
Yeah. I love researching different psychology, and there's the 10,000 hour rule, which, you practice anything for 10,000 hours. Really, that's what it takes to become a master. Now you can have high levels of proficiency below that, but it just makes me think, starting at such a young age, and those students that really grasp on and have a focus. It just kind of makes me wonder the future of Newburgh and really Yamhill County as these students who start from such a young age, how amazing they'll be by the time they get to the middle school and high school and going into college. I have a feeling some of these students may become,
musicians.
Very yeah, it's exciting to see. I was a kind of music nerd on my own. I went to George Fox University and was in the choir there, and absolutely loved the orchestra. Got little kids now, so they can't really sit still during an orchestra, but one day we'll go back. Yeah. But it's such an amazing, you're right, the full brain workout makes me want to go home and start getting my kids on violin lessons, which brings up a question. I know many people who are not within one of those schools, maybe they're homeschooled, maybe they're in a private school, who would say, hey, can we get access? And I know the answer is no, But do you have any tips or advice of like, hey, here's, if in this position where you're not a part of the Joy program, what might you suggest?
Oh gosh, I think the only alternative that I know of has been private lessons. And, maybe you could trade lessons for something. I don't, the old barter system.
Yeah.
But that's why we want Joy in every school.
Yeah.
So that we won't have this problem. Now that leaves out private schools and homeschooling. But, once we get in all the public schools, there's no reason we can't expand and include everybody.
Yeah. Well, you got to start somewhere.
Right.
I think a lot of times it's so easy to say if we can't do everything, we shouldn't do anything. And I think you've done an amazing thing by starting in one of the schools that had many of the most disadvantaged students. And, there's not that there aren't disadvantaged students elsewhere, but, I think that you're starting with a really high impact.
Right.
And personally, I would love to see, and granted, it would take a lot of effort to have it go beyond where it's outside of the school. But I imagine there would be a lot of support for that. Maybe we can talk offline down the road, because my son just turned 5 and is a prime candidate. He loves music and is at that age. I was literally just looking on Facebook Marketplace this past week for a violin, wondering maybe I could learn and teach him. Just, I at least could learn enough myself to teach a 5-year-old. maybe.
We actually start with what are called box violins. They don't start with the real wooden violin. And a box violin is like a Kleenex box, a tissue box, and we use a paint stirrer as the fret, and they learn to hold it the proper position. They learn how to carry it. They learn respect for it. And when they hold it up, they sing. It's the Suzuki method is what it's called. And then maybe midway through the year in January, the excitement builds and they actually get their real violin.
Yeah.
And then they know how to treat it. So we've had very little repair issues.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, because that was also a concern. You don't want to give a child something. I made that mistake with one of those little guitars. I got him this guitar. I was so excited, somehow thinking that he was going to love guitar. Next thing I know, the strings are broken. It's being used as a drum. And
oh my gosh!
all other kinds of things. But no, that's really exciting. I'm so thankful to you. Like you said, the only other option has been private lessons, which is so unattainable for most people.
Right.
So I look forward to seeing how this program grows and expands and affects the young lives here. Do you have any specific stories about a specific family or child who was really impacted that made you just go, yes, like that's what I was really hoping for? Have you heard any of those?
Well, we have. We've had some parents write us letters, which have been very touching, about how one parent wrote us and said that their daughter was so proud of being able to play the viola and took it every time they had a family get together and would stand up and play for everybody. And that, that was her identity, was to be able to, that she was able to play this instrument. And the same woman said that she had another child who was about to begin kindergarten who was very excited about being part of the program. Had another woman write and say that her son doesn't like school, and on the days when he knows that they have violin class, he wants to go. So that's very touching too. And after concerts, I've had parents stop and say, thank you for doing this wonderful program. So they haven't given me specific stories, but for them to go up and say that, come up and say that. And I had one student after a concert recently come up and get my attention and thank me. I was so touched. I think his mother asked him to do that. But anyway, he did it, and he did a very, very nice job of thanking me.
Yeah. Wow. It's interesting being in a position where you're leading a nonprofit, or I mean, just in this case with the Giving Town podcast. Every once in a while, you hear stories of someone like in this case, they'll hear a story, and I get to hear of some way they got involved with another nonprofit, or they learned something new, and those are really make it worth it. I'm sure there's so many kids and families who are touched who don't take the time to reach out, but I'm sure it really makes your day when they do.
Yes.
So how can people learn more about this or get involved or support whether it's the Joy or the Imagination Library Partnership or just the Yamhill Enrichment Society as a whole?
Well, the best thing is to go on our website and really learn what we do in more detail. And that is simply YamhillEnrichmentSociety.org, not .com, .org. And you will see, I think there's some videos on there and descriptions and all kinds of information. Our biggest need at this point is not volunteers, it's funding. That we exist on the generosity of the community, and that includes individuals and businesses who have been very supportive. George Fox has been one of our strongest supporters, and grants from foundations. So the Joy program is actually a very expensive program. In my mind, it's well worth it. I'm willing to fundraise for it. But you've got labor, you've got instruments. There's just a lot of cost that goes into it.
Yeah.
And it's very, for the number of children that we are able to serve, we hope that increases. But as it increases, you need more instruments and more teachers. So
yeah. And now, do the students keep the instruments?
No.
Okay.
No. So in kindergarten and first grade, there's one classroom of instruments, and every class that comes in gets to use those violins. But then when you have viola and cello and it's in the afternoon, we essentially let kids have the instrument while they're playing, and then they turn them in.
Wow. Well, one of the other questions that I ask every guest that comes on, and I didn't prepare you with this one, but what is something that gives you hope for the future of Newburgh and Yamhill County?
Well, I think it's really the two programs that we're promoting that as they grow, I see huge potential for Joy especially. It's the younger program. Imagination Library, we have enrolled half the demographic of, 0 to 5-year-olds, and that will stay steady. But Joy has incredible potential. I would love to see Joy grow into its name, actually have an orchestra of all of Yamhill County that comes out of this training that we're doing in the elementary schools.
Yeah, and I love the name because Joy is something, the actual, I don't even know, it's not really, it's kind of an emotion. I don't even know how to describe it.
It's what you feel when you play music.
Yeah, it's so much, it really is. When you're in flow, when you have that, there's really not much else like it when you're playing with other people and you're in sync. It's very fulfilling, very rewarding. And yes, joy is a very descriptive, our business name is the Joyful Robbers. So we obviously believe in joy and believe we can't get enough of it. So, Susan, thank you so much for taking the time today to be on the podcast. It's been great getting to talk to you a bit, hearing your story and about all the different programs that you're a part of. So thank you so much, and thanks for bringing more joy to our community.
Oh, well, thank you for what you do.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for tuning in to the Givingtown podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend who you think might benefit from hearing it. While more and more people are continuing to hear about this podcast, I still need your help to spread the message about all the people and organizations that make Newburgh so great. Well, thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next episode.